because you told me, or you told your supervisor and they told me. And that was it was like insurance. I said, you're buying insurance. I'm your insurance policy. As long as I know about it in advance and I decide it's not important enough to do something about it in advance, then you're going to get a payout. And I have easier claims people than Geico or Progressive or any of them. Because I'm going to sit in the room with the boss and say, they told me about it, and I didn't think we should do anything about it, and then he can vent on me. But that saves you the headache of having to do that. Because the one thing that AGs don't like to do is to vent to their staff. Because they know, one, you're underpaid. Sorry, Al. Two, you're probably overworked, because all of us have gone through budget cuts. And three, and most importantly, you're almost always underappreciated. Because, yeah, there's the cartoon of the public servant pushing people out of the way, but the reality is we do a lot of really good work and help a lot of people. It's why a lot of us do this. But there's not a lot of kudos in it. There's not a lot of gratitude in it. Your agency directors tend to forget that you pulled their ass out of the fire within 30 seconds or however long it takes for their next problem to arise. So just remember, you're involved because you're here, but there's circumstances beyond what you need to deal with. You just need to let the folks up the food chain know what's going on. And then they can tell you what to do or how to deal with it. So, and again, this is part of what Mary Jo said. The two most important things you can do once you're aware is to be professional and respectful. And you can either pass it up the food chain and wait for further instructions. But there's going to be times when you don't have time to do that. You're sitting in front of the judge and opposing counsel has made some frivolous motion, or as in our case, he's put up in his closing argument a big, huge PowerPoint slide of my boss's head and said my boss is trying to circumvent justice for these poor innocent people by not paying this claim in a closing argument. I mean, come on. So you're going to have to decide what to do. These are included in Mary Jo's 10 Commandments. Rule number 1, do not lie. Never, ever, ever lie. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. A very wonderful person in my office heads my consumer mediation section. And one morning she walks out. We have a separate office building for our lawyers. The AG and I are in the Capitol because the legislature is slowly kicking everybody out of the Capitol but themselves. So all of our lawyers are housed in another building downtown. And she walks out. It's a normal morning. She's going to the Starbucks to get coffee. And some young, college-age person comes up and asks her, so how many hours is Holly Bolin taking a vacation to work on the campaign? Holly Bolin's our chief of staff. And she's like, panics and says something, none of which she had any idea because she would never see Holly's timesheet. But it turns out that the Democrats were slowly trying to reach out and touch people in our office to get dirt. The 36 public records requests were not enough. They wanted to reach out and touch people. So it's going to happen. You'll have people come up and ask you, or you'll be at a cocktail party, or you'll be at a restaurant, and somebody asks you. Rule number 1, do not lie. Tell the truth. If you don't know, don't know. As I told my people, and I'll let Al tell you what he thinks he wants you to do, I told him you don't have to talk to him. The media, we have a policy. You refer them to the PIO. But if it's someone who doesn't identify themselves as media, you don't have to talk about the office if you don't want to. But if you decide you want to, all I ask is you do not lie. Because as long as you don't lie, we're comfortable with what we do. We think we're doing the right thing. We'll defend any action we take. But if you lie, then we got to figure out how to deal with those consequences because now you've created some confusion and some controversy where it doesn't exist. So, rule number 1, do not lie. Rule number 2 is one of something that I believe is got to be your guiding principle. I can't think of a single AG that I've dealt with the exception of maybe one crazy guy, who it isn't their motivation, which is do the right thing. If you have to make a snap judgment, trust your instincts and do what you think the right thing is. And usually doing the right thing is you're trying to help someone or you're trying to represent your client agency. But if you take anything from this training on civility or professionalism or ethics, it's all about doing the right thing. And when I was in law school, we had this great professor. He was a throwback to the hippies. He'd went from law school. He'd never gotten a grade less than A+ his entire law school. Went directly to Harvard, did some postdoc, was on the faculty, came back, and he used to teach ethics. And classic hippie, Birkenstocks, hair longer than mine, beard. And we used to sit and talk during our ethics thing, and he said, look, there's only one rule you need to know about ethics. And there's only one caveat to that rule, and I'll get to it. But the rule is, if you can't tell your mother what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Unless, of course, your mother is a serial killer, then that rule doesn't apply. So, do these things. Don't lie, and do the right thing. When push comes to shove, and you have to make a snap decision, do the right thing. And that's what I told my people. If you come to me and tell me, this is what I thought the right thing was, and I didn't have time to get a hold of you, but I did tell you this case was coming up, and I'm like, perfect. I'll live with that. We'll deal with it. But if you lie, then I got to answer 35 more questions from the reporter, because now you've created an issue where it didn't exist before. So always remember that. If you can't report it up the food chain, and I'm actively telling you to CYA by pushing everything upstairs, if you can't do that, don't lie and do the right thing. And again, that's here's what not to do. Don't blast your way through. Saying, I'll be back is never appropriate in our work. It might be appropriate for a private litigator, but as Mary Jo said, and as Al has emphasized, we believe AG's offices, and this is kind of a nationwide principle for all the AGs, we believe we're held to a higher standard. You know, one of the offices that we try to emulate is the Solicitor General's Office of the United States. Now, they're part of DOJ, and regardless of your political persuasion, at one time or another, you wanted to strangle a DOJ lawyer. Come on, admit it. We all do. They're aggravating. They take stupid positions at times. A lot of times it's unfortunately driven by politics. There's rogue federal U.S. attorneys out there on both sides of the odds. But the Solicitor General's office plays by a different set of rules. And their rules are designed by the people they appear before, the 9 justices on the Supreme Court. And in that court, you do not lie. You tell them everything. Because if you don't tell them about a case and deal with a case that's contrary to your position, then you're going to spend your entire oral argument, depending on whether you're on one side or the other, getting it from Breyer or getting it from Scalia. So they always lay everything out. And then the solicitor's office tell you what. And the interesting thing about the solicitor's office is they will not appeal cases, even though the president, DOJ, the agency wants them to appeal. They do it strictly on the legal merits. And it's one of the things I think that as AG's offices we can emulate is the way they deal not only with the court, but with other lawyers. I have had the best relationships amongst government lawyers and am able to talk to folks who've been in the solicitor's office and in fact who are still there. And I started out my career doing we had 2 interstate water cases. We don't get along with our neighbors very well when it comes to water, which I think you guys are kind of familiar with. And so I started out in the office dealing with these guys in the Solicitor General's office. I thought this is going to be great. This is so much better than private practice. I don't have to go to Warrenton, Michigan and sit in this big warehouse that GM puts you in. It's like the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're putting the box away. Well, they walk you in there and go, here's all your documents to look at. Have fun. These guys were great. Oh, yeah. Continuance. Yes, no problem. This is, and you can have an honest discussion with them. So that's what we as AGs, I know the AG's directive is to be more like that. We have a higher calling. We have a greater responsibility. So blasting your way through is not always the best solution. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes, and if anybody gets this right, Al will give them a prize. To disagree, one doesn't have to be disagreeable if you are aware, professional, and respectful. All right, so anybody have any idea who gave us that quote? Dang. This is the guy who in 1964, if you think politics are nasty now, in 1964, the Democrats and Lyndon Johnson made a TV commercial in their campaign against Barry Goldwater. It was a nice, cute little girl in a park pulling parts off of a daisy. Until about 30 seconds into the commercial when a nuclear explosion went off behind her. The basic premise being if you elect Barry Goldwater, he's going to kill everyone. So congratulations to Dave. That's right, it's Barry Goldwater. But Barry was right. He was one of the last hard rock conservatives who understood, and there's very few of these on the Democratic side anymore either,